Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. I am delighted to have Yasuhiko Kimura back. We are continuing his series on new spirituality for the future. We are on number 6. Yasuhiko, what are we doing today?
Okay, so today we'll be touching upon postmodernism and beyond. Because postmodernism, maybe you can start from Nietzsche, but there is a response to the crisis of consciousness. And there are many elements of postmodernism that are very, very interesting in this regard. But before I get into this, I want to share my thought on evolution in consciousness versus evolution of consciousness. There are distinctions. So evolution in consciousness is possible within one lifetime, while evolution of consciousness is transgenerational. Evolution in consciousness is the fulfillment of each of our evolutionary potential and capacity. So it is properly called transmutational or transformational development. And this development never ends until the end of our life, if we are on the path of evolution. But evolution of consciousness requires and is coextensive and coterminous with the new growth of the human evolutionary potential and the capacity. The human brain and our human brain mind system and our chakric configuration need to evolve. So such a transgenerational evolution of the brain mind system and chakric system has been taking place since the late 18th and early 19th century, when the crisis of consciousness began. So therefore, the modern and the postmodern humans are evolutionary transitional beings. Homo sapiens transitus, we can say. And as the great contemporary Indian sage, Gopi Krishna, he was alive when I went to India, but I didn't know about his existence. The Gopi Krishna realized the human brain-mind system is in the middle of evolution. And since around 2005, it has been my observation that the modern and postmodern humans have probably more than 7 chakric energy centers or force field. I don't think we have settled. Something is happening in our system. Somewhere I read that Neanderthals had 5 chakras. Cro-Magnons have 7 chakras. And probably new future humans will have more chakras and different configurations and different interactions amongst them. So evolution in consciousness requires that we harmoniously develop our intellective, mental, affective, emotional, and kinetic physical intelligences. You and I have mostly spoken about intellectual mental intelligences, but we should not ignore physical kinetic and affective emotional intelligences. They need to all develop together harmoniously in order for humans to have an evolution in consciousness and eventually evolution of consciousness. So our collective effort in the evolution in consciousness will lead to the evolution of consciousness of the human race. I used to post almost every day some thought on Facebook, my page. And today I just found that 7 years ago today, I posted this, just very apropos for this. So it titled Consciousness, Supernova, Punctuated Equilibrium, and World Change. And here I said, without a shift in consciousness, no real change can ever happen. And human consciousness is volitional. Thus, external events can trigger an occasion, but the shift needs to be initiated from within. People come up with great models and systems, but it is the humans that execute or operate a model or system. An advanced model or system usually becomes downgraded to match the level and kind of consciousness of the humans, because our knowing and thinking, or knowledge and thought, are usually more advanced than our being. That is, we do not or cannot practice what we preach. So our being shifts as our consciousness shifts. And for the shift of consciousness, we need an inner work in which only few seems to be really willing to engage. This is why I have written that those who are not willing to be changed or transformed in the process of changing or transforming the world are not qualified for the task. Having said the above, there are times when the cosmic or celestial influences make it more conducive for the terrestrial beings to evolve. What is called punctuated equilibrium can be explained by those cosmic influences. There is a constant cosmic stream or shower, for instance, of neutrinos. About 65 billion solar neutrinos per second pass through every square centimeter perpendicular to the direction of the sun in the region of the Earth. And the sun is not the only source of neutrinos. So neutrinos have mass, and therefore it is imprintable. Imagine their impact on the subatomic, sub-DNA, and subcellular level of our existence. This may be a scientific foundation of astrology. Historically, supernova explosions have coincided with great advances in consciousness, thought, and knowledge of humanity. And currently, we are in the middle of one such supernova explosions. We can ride on the cosmic evolutionary flow to our great advantage. But still, we must do the inner work ourselves. Such is the nature of human consciousness. By the way, the new generations of humans that will be born out of generations X, Y, Z, no X actually, generation Y and Z, and after, will have absorbed at the genetic level the impact of the current cosmic shower. We may see a different kind of humanity emerging, and with which a different kind of world arising. From this perspective, while engaging in our inner transformational work, what we need to do is more getting out of the way of evolution than trying to change the world. So I want to make sure that you and I are working on evolution in consciousness, and together we direct the evolution of consciousness. Together we direct our evolutionary movement toward the evolution of consciousness, and cosmically things are happening for that to happen.
Wonderful.
So it is in this context we will continue our exploration into the possible new spirituality of the future, while deepening our understanding of the crisis of consciousness, which we are now experiencing. So that is today's subject.
Wonderful. Please go on.
Yes. So I want to start with the famous proclamation of Nietzsche, God is dead. He introduced this in his Joyous Science, which was published just before the Zarathustra. He says this: God is dead, but given the ways of man, perhaps for millennia to come, there will be caves in which his shadow will be shown, and we still have to vanquish his shadow too. So Nietzsche's pronouncement, God is dead, is a symbolic pronouncement of the crisis of consciousness that began in the late 18th century and has become increasingly more pronounced throughout the 19th, 20th, and 21st century. Now, the breakdown of the bicameral mind, of which Julian Jaynes speaks 3 millennia ago, was tantamount to the death of polytheistic gods and of the mentality and consciousness inherent therein. The voice of gods became inadequate for effectively dealing with the increasingly more complex human life and society. So about 17 or 1800 years later, no, more than that. How many years? 2700 years later, the breakdown of the rational, egological mind of the present crisis is tantamount to the death of the monotheistic God and the mentality and the consciousness inherent therein. The breakdown of the rational, egological mind was its own doing. Therefore, Nietzsche has this sentence: we killed God. Because first of all, the rational faculty of the mind brought forth the Renaissance, the age of reason, the age of enlightenment, and the scientific revolution and American Revolution. The scientific worldview that developed dethroned God and mankind as the central locus of the universe, so-called Copernican revolution. This breakdown reveals the unresolved inner contradiction existing in consciousness, that is, the rational mind operating with the bicameral mind operating system. Before Nietzsche, Giordano Bruno and Baruch Spinoza, in essence, declared the death of God by reconceptualizing and redefining what God is and presenting new visions of the universe and nature radically different from that of Christianity. After the breakdown of the bicameral mind and the end of mythological age, the new rational mind began rationalizing the transcendental realm of gods into its philosophical meta-narrative as the transcendental realm of God, the Platonic world of ideas and forms. The mystical bicameral mind became the rational binary logic mind that retained a transcendental realm and developed systems of dualistic, idealist metaphysics of this illusory world versus the other true world. Plato and Parmenides before him were great architects of this kind of metaphysics. This worldly Aristotle, even Aristotle was influenced by his teacher in the formulation of his metaphysics. Christian theology was based on Platonic and Neoplatonic philosophies, and then the Thomas Aquinas integrated Aristotelian philosophy into Christian theology. The Enlightenment philosophers, such as Kant and Hegel, were no different in this regard. Kant's the world in which things in itself, things in themselves exist, is a new version of Platonic form. So is Hegel's spirit. And actually, in that sense, Schopenhauer's will. Spinoza replaced both the creation and emanation models of reality. There are two models before Spinoza. God, the creator, created the universe, or God emanating. That emanation became the reality. God is outside in that sense. And he created this immanentist model of reality in nature. The God equals nature, and it is all the creation is God's immanent God nature expressing itself. So Spinoza was a metaphysical monist and immanentist through and through. The Irish Enlightenment philosopher John Toland later coined the term pantheism to designate Spinoza's immanentism. Nietzsche was also an immanentist and creatively integrating Spinoza and Boschkovich. He was, as I call, a monistic pan-dynamist immanentist. So Nietzsche recognized the ending of the foundational universalist metaphysical meta-narrative built upon the concept of God or transcendental truth that were so deeply embedded in the consciousness and psychopistemology of humanity. Psychologically, death of God means the death of all forms of external authority and people's psychopistemological dependence on God and God-based metaphysics. This crisis is an opportunity for breakthrough to a further evolution of consciousness, but also poses a danger, an imminence in the absence of such breakthrough. Nietzsche was keenly aware of this danger, probably more than anyone at that time. The God that is dead represents all that which humanity apostatizes and deifies. Since the dawn of consciousness, since the time of the pre-Socratic philosophers and their contemporaries in the East, the history of philosophy has been a struggle between the evolutionary will to power of the rational individualistic internal authority mentality and the reactionary will to power of the vestigial bicameral mind's transcendentalist external authority mentality. Aristotle, but more Heraclitus, Democritus, or Epicurus represent the first evolutionary will to power of the rational individualistic internal authority mentality, and while Plato represents the second, the reactionary will to power of the vestigial bicameral mind's transcendentalist and dualistic external authority mentality. In the West, with the prevailing advent of Christianity, the Platonistic philosophy became predominant until the Renaissance. Reformation was the reactionary movement after the collapse of the monopoly of the Catholic Church. The Renaissance brought forth the age of reason, the age of enlightenment, scientific revolution, and the American Revolution. But the tremendous success of science and the subsequent advance of the techno-scientific world created a psycho-philosophical void, nihilism, because mechanistic scientific worldview was utterly inadequate as a philosophy because it did not provide answers to the questions concerning the meaning, value, and purpose of human existence. Furthermore, the rational scientific mind was not free from the vestige of the bicameral mind. And the scientists apostatized, if not deified, science and scientific truth, which replaced God as the idol of the dogmatic external authority worship, the vestige of the bicameral mind. As Nietzsche wrote in the genealogy of morality, the scientists may not believe in the God of religion, but believe in the truth of science. The scientists, while professing not to believe in metaphysics, still believe in the metaphysics of scientific truth, which belief belongs to the domain of metaphysical judgment that is unprovable by science. So the belief in religion and the belief in science both represent the moribund modality of consciousness. The death of God means the death of both the religious dogmatism and the scientific dogmatism, such as scientism or positivism or materialism. So death of God implies A, the ending of the monotheistic God as the absolute external authority whose function it is to be the ultimate value, meaning, and purpose giver to humanity. B, with the death of God, the human ego lost its place in the whole scheme of the God created the universe, including the meaning, value, and the purpose of life. See, the ending of monological reductionist absolutism of all kinds, including scientism and materialism. D, the ending of idolatry of all kinds, including the idolization of scientific truth, the ending of the belief and believing based mentality as such. So in the final analysis, the death of God is actually good news, a gospel. We humans are now on our own, and we must think for ourselves, and we must create values, meanings, and purposes for ourselves. We can overcome nihilism by completely embracing the evolutionary path towards the Übermensch. So right now, we are in that transitionary stage. And we can achieve evolution in consciousness. And that we can kind of have a glimpse at evolution of consciousness. That will happen if we work together. So now I am interested in postmodernist philosophers.
Yasuhiko, I just want to say something.
Yes.
This is a brilliant summary. This is a brilliant summary, one of the best summaries I've heard of the transition from the bicameral mind, because what you have done is that you have expanded the same theme, the Julian Jaynes theme, at the breakdown of bicameral mind, just before the axial age. Mm-hmm. You're talking about 800 BC. Mm-hmm. And you have shown that the same pattern is happening now. When Nietzsche is talking about it, so in some ways what happened was that God was dead in the axial age.
Yes.
And a new mentality was born where individuals began to use their own consciousness to map out in mental space the analogs of the world by themselves instead of from an external authority. Mm-hmm. And started to posit what themselves as an analog eye could possibly do. So envision multiple futures for themselves and the world internally in the interiority. And that was the beginning of thinking, beginning of consciousness. Now, what happened was people like Plato took us back. They, in a different guise, brought back the God and made, again, this independent human mind, the rational individual mind, subservient to the God in the language of this new rational faculties. They use, like Socrates' language, but they brought back that bicameral way of thinking. And that entire line from Plato, Plotinus, Augustine, Kant, even Kant, Hegel, but even somebody like Descartes, who kind of separates out the physical world and keeps the other world aside. All of them are ways of trying to get back to God. And what Nietzsche is saying, no, God is dead. And I thought you did a fantastic summary of this. So please go on, sir.
Thank you. So Nietzsche was a pioneer, and many brilliant philosophers followed him. And in a way that culminated in postmodernist philosophers. There is no such thing as postmodernism in terms of philosophy, because there are a number of philosophers, brilliant ones. They each had different philosophy, and they disagreed with each other. Sometimes very heated, sometimes very respectful. Many of them are actually friends. So postmodernism is a succession from Nietzsche, and it reflects the crisis of consciousness. And each of those brilliant postmodernist philosophers, such as Martin Heidegger, Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, Jean Baudrillard, I don't know how to pronounce his name actually, Baudrillard, and Gilles Deleuze, and in America, Richard Rorty. Each standing on the shoulder of the philosophers and influenced by Nietzsche, explored new possibilities. And when you read their writings, you can really see a new mode of consciousness is trying to be born. Postmodernism has bad names, in many ways, because they see the diluted versions. I listened to Jordan Peterson's talk on postmodernism. In my view, I respectfully disagree with him, and I don't know he actually understands postmodernism, postmodernist philosophers, because those people have done a brilliant job, unbelievable. It is amazing depths each brought into their own thinking, and originality too. So postmodern philosophers were acutely aware of the crisis of consciousness. There is no single postmodern philosophy. The postmodern philosophers disagree, as I said, with one another, but share some basic orientations which we can observe in Nietzsche. One is their perspectivism. They recognize that a perspective is all we have. In my view, this perspectivism opens up a unique possibility that contributes to the evolution in and of consciousness. You see, all the ancient models, either Platonistic or Aristotelian. Many of the spiritual teachers, all the way to people like Aurobindo, they are all universalist, foundationalist, going into a transcendental view that transcends your individual perspective. Jean Gebser, who has written an amazing book on the evolution of consciousness, he calls this new mode of consciousness emerging integral perspectival. But when you really integrally understand, human beings cannot not to have perspective. And instead of seeing this as a negative, I see this as positive. So what follows is my elaboration and development of perspectivism, which is not just only epistemological, but ontological. So if we each is true to his or her self, if we each develops a cosmic singularity, if we each follows his or her will to power purely and integrally, none of us will have the same perspective as other people, for cosmic singularity includes perspectival singularity. We are existentially singular, ontologically and epistemologically. We each occupies a singular locus of the universe with a unique angle to the universe and therefore perspective. And this perspectival singularity is to be welcomed and celebrated. In the process of enculturation, acculturation, and mimetic learning, which start as soon as we are born and whose foundation is laid out in Marathi and in Japanese by the time we become 3 years old. We are given culturally homogenized perspectives in the space of language by our society. This is one of the primary reasons that agreement becomes such a big deal in our society and culture. The agreement that is holding and sharing the same perspectives, opinions, beliefs, worldviews is an integral part of this enculturation, acculturation, this cultural conditioning to be homogenized. Most people never have their own unique and singular perspective. Their perspectives are culturally programmed and socially conditioned. You cannot have your own unique singular perspective without being who you authentically are. So people are what Nietzsche called sheep herd. People have a herd mentality, hive mind. Their perspectives are homogenized. And one group have different perspective from another group, but there is no individual perspective. Having one's own authentic perspective implies that you are one is who one is, and one is thinking authentically. So the primary question is not what perspective you have, but whether or not it is authentically yours. When you have and when you are the perspective that is authentically yours, which is therefore cosmically singular, the monad that you are becomes authentically you. You begin to truly appreciate the perspectives of other people that are different from your own. This is to appreciate the monads that they are. There should be as many perspectives as there are authentic individuals who have developed their own perspectives. Therefore, values and meanings that they create will differ. And in this sense, everything is perspective, perspective-wise relative. Also, you can hold and experiment with different perspectives. This is what it means to be multi-perspectival. And this becomes so self-consciously acute amongst the postmodern philosophers. just like Nietzsche, they questioned long-held assumptions, philosophical assumptions of past philosophers. And they begin to think and create their own unique perspectives. To me, that is the most significant aspect of postmodernism, beyond what they each said, with which you can agree or disagree. But they brought forth unique perspective, and that they could do it is more important than what they did. So that you have the trans-paradigmatic mind does not mean that you are perspectival. It means that you can understand and hold multiple perspectives within your singular perspective. You are dialogical and multilogical, but your trans-paradigmatic mind retains its unique ontological and epistemological perspective. That is, your trans-paradigmatic mind is unique. And at the developmental summit of our individual singularity, we will meet on the same altitude of consciousness and share the same panoramic view of the universe, each from his or her unique perspective. So when you read an account or expression of enlightened masters, one thing becomes very clear. There's an originality to what they're saying. At the same time, you can see they are seeing this, they are expressing the same altitude of consciousness and the universe that is revealed to them. So in Japan, we have a saying, any path will eventually lead to the summit of Mount Fuji. But I will say at the top of the Mount Fuji, there is a planetarium. You enter the same planetarium, but each is sitting in a different seat, and end up seeing the same thing, but your unique perspective remains. So at the core of at the summit of your individuality, you achieve the universality. It is not the discarding of your individuality. You achieve universality or cosmicality. And so it is extremely important for the spiritual developmental programs to emphasize this aspect. Many of the spiritual teachers and teachings, at least on the appearance, seems to tell you, let go of your individuality. It is not. Let go of your ego, maybe, but not let go of your individuality. You need to be fully integrated, indivisible wholeness of being, which is individuality. You have a perspective, cosmically singular, that universe has never been seen in the same way as before. So postmodernists, they may not have gone all the way, but they have begun this process of working and developing a more and more singular perspective. And that needs to be welcomed. And that's how I read their writings. And another positive aspect of postmodern philosophies, which is similar to this, the first point I mentioned, is a shift in the paradigm of philosophy from discovery to creation, from truth seeking to sense making, which is extremely made clear by Nietzsche and Deleuze. So in the past, we had this fundamental assumption that truth is there, and our job is to discover. And Nietzsche and Deleuze and other postmodern philosophers challenge that assumption. Spinoza identified two attributes of the infinite substance that he called nature or God. But he also said there's only two attributes that we can identify so far. There must be many more. So he was making a little bit of transition. But still he was in the discovery mode. So the function of philosophy is not to discover or reveal or unconceal the eternal transcendental truth that is assumed already to exist, but to create concept and develop conceptual frameworks with which to make sense of reality, which would otherwise remain chaotic and obscure. So Nietzsche, but in particular Deleuze, identified the function of philosophy to be concept creation. It's almost like you need to create a telescope or microscope. Your job is to creating this framework, the best possible framework, which gives you the most potent perspective through which to see life. So they consider a philosopher to be more like an artist. So philosophy is more like an art. It is creative. The work of philosophy is to create new ideas and to develop new ways of thinking and seeing. And this is what I wrote many years ago, expressing the same kind of thought. The ultimate in creativity is that which creates new perceptions of reality and the visions of world. This creativity transcends and is more fundamental than any art form. It is the direct participation in the creative process of the universe. It is the foreseeing of a possibility arising as a new future in the cosmic evolution. And evolution is synonymous with exploration. The more evolved we are in consciousness, the farther is our horizon of our exploration, and the greater is our capacity for exploration. I hold that the exploration of this vast physical, metaphysical multiverse and the concomitant evolution in and of consciousness is the purpose of our cosmic existence. We are cosmic explorers, and we should never forget this glorious assignment. Therefore, for example, the question that people used to ask about morality, because God is there and God is giving moral command. What moral law is to be discovered and obeyed. So people used to ask, how should I live? But if you are not in that mode, the question may be, how might I live? And should disappears. Your moral question becomes how I might live. So it is a creative process. So this is the second aspect of postmodernity, postmodern philosophy that I highly appreciate. And you know, there are all, when you reach the limit of your mind, intelligence, and consciousness, you can see this vastness of the unknowable. And when you have a new kind of consciousness, we will step into that dimension. But then there's, again, the unknowable. So what we can do is to create the most powerful telescope or microscope made of concept to explore this vast universe, the vast reality. And that was made explicit through Nietzsche and many of those postmodern philosophers. The problem that Nietzsche or postmodern philosophers had, as I said, in order for the consciousness to evolve, you need to have a harmonious development of your intellect, the emotion, and body. Intellectual mental intelligence affect the emotional intelligence, and kinetic physical intelligence working together and evolving together. That is essential element of evolution of consciousness. We don't talk too much about this. But what happened with this, Nietzsche and then others, they have an outgrown mind. The emotional and the physical kinetic dimension has been ignored. So there was no harmonious development. So what happens? Nietzsche goes insane. Deleuze commits suicide. He was a heavy smoker, and so he was too painful physically painful to live. Imagine if Nietzsche and Deleuze had a spiritual practice, like an integral yoga, for example, and really worked on every dimension of their being. Probably they would have continued their development. So that's a tragedy of postmodernists. They ignored completely other dimension of human being, the need and the necessity of harmonious development. Now, having said that, there's one more which you'll be extremely interested. Dimension of postmodernism. So Julian Jaynes, in his depiction of consciousness, he selects 6 major features. And number 1 on the list is spatiation of time. What is happening? And future new consciousness will have another feature complementary to this: temporalization of space and primacy of becoming over being. You see, at this moment, we think and conceptualize in terms of space and of being. The 4-dimensional space-time of general relativity is conceived and conceptualized in terms of a space. God or Brahman is recognized and conceptualized as being and as unchanging reality. Sat, Chit, Ananda, another aspect. So if we use a different terminology, use Walter Russell or Nietzschean terminology, or actually Rudolf Steiner terminology, Chit is light. No, sorry, Sat is light. And Chit is lightening, enlightening, and Ananda is delight or delighting. So there is that element. But fundamentally, we have still a being. So being is supreme and primary, and becoming is inferior and secondary. With many of the teachings, becoming is like a, appearance, illusion. Being is real. So new mode of consciousness that is developing are able to conceptualize space temporarily and be able to see becoming as more primary than being. And so it is complementary. I'm not saying which is better. At this moment, it is very difficult for people to see space temporarily and primacy of becoming as a different perspective. So the new consciousness that is arising is capable of temporalization of space, and the new philosophy allows the supremacy of primacy of becoming over being. In the history of philosophy, in the West, pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus is known to have claimed against Parmenides, to whom being was supreme and only reality, the supremacy of becoming over being. And in the East, Taoists metaphorically conceive the Tao to be like water, current. And while the Buddhists advance the process-oriented, meditative, phenomenological mode of seeing and thinking, in which becoming is primary. Of modern and postmodern Western philosophers, Nietzsche, Andy Bergson, Alfred North Whitehead, and Jill, I don't know how to hit Jill, I think Jill Deleuze are well known for their recognitions of primary importance of becoming or process and time. Although Whitehead was, I would say he was a more Platonist and influenced by Platonic thinking heavily. So he still looked at the process in terms of space. But he has more influence than Bergson, I think, today. But Andy Bergson wrote, "To exist is to change, and to change is to mature, and to mature is to go on creating oneself endlessly." So both Nietzsche and Deleuze agree with this, and therefore they could have said this, the same thing. In a way, Nietzsche said almost identical thing. Andy Bergson's concept of time, which Deleuze further elaborated and developed, is this: the present exists actually. The past exists virtually. Unlike Whitehead, who called this potentially, but he called virtually. And present moment actualizes the virtual. The present exists actually, the past exists virtually, and the present moment actualizes the virtual. So the present actual carries within the entirety of the past virtual, like in the manner of DNA. The present moment is a realm wherein various elements, which Deleuze called manifold, of the past and the future interact, which Deleuze called synthesize. So for him, for Deleuze, eternal recurrence was not the eternal recurrence of the same. It was the eternal recurrence of the difference. One primary feature of our consciousness is the spatialization of time, and therefore we see present moment as a point in the line of the past, the present, and the future. And Bergson actually and Deleuze is pointing out a different way of seeing. And they see time as a realm in which the past, the present, and the future will all coexist as a virtual manifold, which synthesize into to be actualized, and therefore the universe as a temporal expression of something from within. This is a new kind of ontology that does not reduce reality to noble unit of being, but instead seeks to widen our thoughts and expand our consciousness to palpate the unknowable. There is reality we want to touch, yet which we are unable to touch so long as we are being held by the present mode of consciousness, which is a band in the middle with something below and consciousness and something beyond the consciousness. We are held by this mode of consciousness we have today. This new ontology of time releases us from that hold. So this new ontology does not reduce reality to noble unit of being, but instead seeks to widen our thoughts and consciousness to palpate the unknowable, seeing time as a realm in which the past, the present, and the future all coexist as a virtual manifold, which synthesizes to be actualized in the present as the present moment. And therefore, we see the universe as a temporal expression of something from within. We have not been fully successful at temporalizing space yet, but you can see the direction that we are moving. Nietzsche initiated this actually, and Deleuze, Bergson, and Deleuze really took it further. And we want to take Deleuze, stand on the Deleuze shoulder and go even further. Just to end my presentation, I've been talking a lot. Just to release our mind from the kind of intellectual engagement, I want to give you a quote from George Gurdjieff, who was one of the rarest of rare humans who had a glimpse of the new consciousness to come. And he talks about the time in one of his books. This is a condensed version, and it is not something that Guruji would recommend me to do, but I just want to do it because of it wraps up this conversation very well. So he says, time is ideally unique subjective phenomenon. Time in itself does not exist. There is only the totality of the results ensuing from all the cosmic phenomena present in a given place, which is a local universe. Time itself, no being can either understand by reason or sense by any outer or inner being function. It cannot even be sensed by any gradation of instinct which arises and is present in every more or less independent cosmic concentration, which is a planet and the suns. It is possible to judge time only if one compares real cosmic phenomena which proceed in the same location, same local universe, and under the same condition where time is being constated and considered. It is necessary to notice that in the great universe, all phenomena in general, without exception, wherever they arise and manifest, simply successively low conformable fractions of some whole phenomenon. In consequence, all cosmic phenomena, wherever they proceed, have a sense of objectivity. And these successively low conformable fractions are actualized in every respect, and even in the sense of their involution and evolution, owing to the chief cosmic law, which he called the law of seven. Only time alone has no sense of real objectivity, because it is not the result of the functioning of any definite cosmic phenomena, and it does not issue from anything but blends always with everything and becomes self-sufficiently independent. Therefore, in the whole of the universe, time alone can be called and extolled as the ideally unique subjective phenomenon. Thus, time alone has no source from which its arising should depend, but like divine love, flows always independently by itself and blends proportionately with all the phenomena present in the given place and in the given arising of our great universe. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Yasuhiko. Yasuhiko, I have comments on all the four things. I want to apply Jane's to it, but I want to give a chance for other people to ask questions first. And if you have time, I want to apply Jane's to all the 4 points about the postmodern thought.
You know, I actually had more stuff to took notes for today, especially about how this monistic pan-dynamism and evolution of consciousness, or evolution in consciousness and evolution of consciousness blend together. But I have been speaking so much that maybe if I have a chance, I will. Very important.
And any thoughts on either of those points?
Well, the last part, becoming conscious of time. This uniquely subjective phenomenon. But when you conceptually grasp time, the consciousness that we have spatialize the time in terms of a like a line moving from, so you can see the change, but conceptualizing it, you see it in space. And our language reflects this, and what I am suggesting is that new mode of conceptualizing space-time. So far, space-time has been conceptualized, visualized, imagined, modeled in terms of space. Time is the fourth dimension of the four-dimensional space-time. When you conceptualize it, time becomes a line. Whether it is straight or circular, whatever it is always seen in terms of spatially. The possibility that is arising is that actually what we call time, what we call space itself becomes subsumed under time. And seeing the new conceptualization in which space is subsumed under time, in which being is subsumed under becoming. So the only being there is a being of a becoming. And so you see, Deleuze was very interested in how come that something new takes place. And so there's a repetition of differences brings new. So already seeing space in terms of time. His book, Difference and Reputation, and is a quite amazing book, actually. So it is a difference. I agree as far as what Julian Jaynes said, but new mode of consciousness is beyond that, And
I fully.
It is difficult to communicate because we use a language which space and being based.
Okay, I want to tell you something. I've been saving this for this. So firstly, I want to say that, this fourth point about temporalization of space is very fundamental, and it is earth-shaking. And what I commented on was just a very tiny 1% point of it, and it's very large. I'm not fully able to get my mind around it. It is a very deep point, and I look forward to exploring that with you. And it's absolutely true.
Well, maybe I need to reread Julian Jaynes also.
But I want to tell you one thing that I just want to show you what Julian Jaynes does. The word be.
Yes.
That is the root of being.
To grow.
Yes. So that the meaning of that is grow.
Yeah.
The meaning of that. Okay. Now, how profound is that?
Yes.
The concept of being itself was becoming. That was what the meaning was. And then later on, it has been separated out like that.
Yes, exactly.
Wonderful. All right, let me give a chance for people to ask questions. Folks, keep your questions short. We're going to start with Ever, followed by Elena. Ever, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was actually very enlightening. I'm curious. First of all, I want to say I agree with you 100% on Jordan Peterson. He's very limited in his understanding of postmodernism, to his detriment. I wanted to ask if you're familiar with the work of Ken Wilber and integral stage theory. And your opinion of it, if it's any benefit to the rest of us in the group. And yes, that'll do for now. Thank you.
Kimura's all-level, all-quadrant model is an excellent model. It is a meta model of many models. And I used to say that Kimura found a created cosmic filing cabinet in which you can put every piece of knowledge. Somehow there's you can categorize them. And there's basically 4 categories, 4 linguistic domains, I, we, it, and they. Q1, Q3, Q2, Q4 in his numbering. So it is 4 different linguistic domain, language domain. And then each one is categorized by the evolutionary sequence. So any book or any body of knowledge you study, you can see where they belong. In that sense, it is an excellent model. It does not explain anything, but it does help you categorizing thought forms. That's number 1. And number 2, his original book, Sex, Ecology, Spirituality, he has, Q1 arrow of human evolution, and then now it is called second tier, and so on and so forth. He speculated how the human consciousness will evolve. And it is very important to know that it is speculation. Same in a way applies to Aurobindo's model too. It is a speculation. And it is nice to have a speculation and see there's so much more to evolve for us. But we do not want to be captured by the speculative model in our actual practice. So that is the limitation. Now people are talking about, they use Kimura's model to discuss many things, which sometimes is inappropriate. And this is a subject of one whole presentation. So I actually met the Kimura once before, and I appreciate his work. We need to know the limitation of his work. And if we know the limitation of his work, it is extremely useful model.
Wonderful, thank you. Folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark if you have any questions. Next up is Elena. Elena, go ahead.
Good afternoon, or good morning. No, good afternoon, everyone. Yasuhiko, I have a question on Gurdjieff's chief universal law. Is one part of my question. Do you refer to the law of 3, wholly affirming, reconciling, and denying, or it's something else? And then also with the referring to the phenomena of time and space continuum. What do you do in terms of once you realize the world you've created, the phenomena you've created are not up to your liking? At this point, of course, from the
I think she lost the internet connection. Oh, there she's back. Elena, there was some problem with your connection. Can you unmute?
Yes, yes. Should I repeat the first or second
The
question?
first one. First one is already clear about Gurdjieff.
Okay.
What
Yeah.
was your question? Can you very briefly summarize the second question?
And the second question to Yasuhiko is, from the point of where he is in terms of development and evolution and growth, if you find yourself creating phenomena not up to your liking, something from the past, space-time continuum, you bring something from the past that you already say observed and noticed, etc. What do you practically do? Okay, in terms of emotions, in terms of action, in terms of observation, and anything else. So that's because of course time is a necessary component for the conscience to exist, because of it's like a water and flour, the both components necessary to make bread. So to me it's yeah, we have to deal with it one way or another.
Okay.
So thank you.
Okay. I praise George Gurdjieff on an entirely different category from the rest of spiritual teachers and philosophers. And the whole system that he presented, many of the aspects are done orally. And what he has written and what people have written about his teachings are so vast that I don't feel comfortable at this moment to speak about. If you are interested, you and I can have a separate conversation because it is so involved. But in this particular quote I quoted from B. Ezerev's Tales to his grandson, that law he was talking about law of seven. That's number one. The rest, I think, you and I can have a separate conversation. It is very involved. And secondly, the reason why I place Gurdjieff on a different level is because of his acute awareness of the depths of human unconsciousness. So today, after the movie Matrix, it became, very fashionable to talk about taking red pill. If you take the red pill, you are out of the matrix, you are awake. Real awakening doesn't go that easily. And what happens is, so you have initial awakening and you realize that you have been asleep. That's by itself is a tremendous accomplishment. But when you really become awake, you realize the depths and extent of metaphysical slumber in which you live. And then when you start to observe so-called spiritual teachers, some of them are authentically awakened. There's a dimensions of their being, that's where asleepness comes in. And I don't think there's anybody who became so clear as to the depths of asleepness. And so when we discuss his philosophy or cosmology, or when we discuss somebody else's teaching, we need to be clear at what level we are talking. And we cannot talk about Gurdjieff on a superficial level. It is impossible to do it. Some people's teaching, for the beginners, you can give a kind of superficial version to talk about it and then go deeper. But Gurdjieff, you have to start from very deep to begin with. So I cannot answer your question in any way sufficiently, given the time and the space that we have here today. But if you are interested in my understanding, I am happy to speak with you separately from this.
Thank you, Yasuhiko. Next up is going to be Rupali from India. Rupali, go ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
This has been really wonderful, and I'm delighted that I can participate today. So I have a question about harmony. And this is something that, I find kind of elusive. Like it happens and then I lose it again. And it happens whether it is just with the work that I'm doing myself individually, not just work, but staying in harmony in that state, and also with people. And so to make it an integral part of how one conducts themselves. So what practices help bring that integration of harmony of the mind, body, soul, spirit? That's my
Great.
question. Thank you.
You always ask excellent questions. Well, first, we need to be aware and cognizant of the importance of harmonious development of all those three dimensions, three intelligences. And today, living in this highly industrial society, we are heavily in our head. And many of the spiritual teachings are also focused on their head. You know, as much as I love Krishnamurti, his approach is entirely intellectual. And Krishnamurti has forgotten, it seems, that before he achieved this awakening, he has gone through a tremendous physical and emotional training, along with his mental training. And so we do need to have that awareness. It is important. And that's the detriment of those people who don't have this awareness. They become head heavy, and they don't evolve. So using Ken Wilber's model, some people reaches a place of like a sixth level, like a green. They now use the spiral dynamics color coding, green mean level of consciousness. And then instead of moving forward by integrating physical and emotional, they become more and more interaction and complicated. So you see, you need to understand the real complexity of the universe and reality by evolving your consciousness. But instead of evolving, they complicate, and it becomes like an intellectual masturbation. They don't move forward, move upward. So that you're asking this question is so important. Now, in terms of actual practice, if you are in a community of spiritual seekers who are following a particular path, you need to choose a particular path that has that integration. Gurudev had, Aurobindo has, this integral yoga, systems of yoga, Gurudev had this elaborate process of integrating those three dimensions, and many others. Then the tradition I went through was not fully integrated. I know that very clearly. So if you are not in any community and you are autodidactically developing, it's still good to have a network of people who are actually in the process of spiritual evolution. And then you need to find the physical and emotional disciplines that really harmoniously be integrated into your intellectual and spiritual developmental practices. And in one way, in a most fundamental sense, it is very individual. The more you become individualized, the more you become aware how individual it is. And so with the awareness that this harmonious development is essential, we must conduct a conscious living. And every aspect of our life, we need to have a conscious living. And then basics, for example, your eating and drinking. you need to find the diet and the way of eating and the environment in which to eat and your emotional mood in which to eat. All those things you need to really consciously develop. You know, it took many years, actually many decades for me to find right diet, the right way of eating my right diet in what kind of environment. So it is like your own, you know, but once you find it, you feel you're physically healthy. I'm healthier now in my 60s than I was when I was in 30s, healthier. And so that is important. Emotional, again, you need to find what it is that, you know, that nurtures. And in my case, I do listen to classical music. Bach, Beethoven, Rachmaninoff, those three are my most favorite. And so every day I listen to those. And sometimes I listen to the music composed by Gurdjieff. And sometimes I listen to the Hindu, you know, music, those that has a connection to the higher dimensional consciousness. And then you want to find a place where you have, you can be yourself to live, and a relationship where you can be nurtured and you can nurture them. So, you know, you have your husband or lover with whom you connect, your friends, continuously develop your community of people, relationships that are conducive to this. So this whole thing, you know, your life becomes the whole thing is conscious living and evolutionary living, and that you don't ignore any aspects of it. So beyond that, it is individual. So, you know, we need to talk separately, but that is my fundamental answer.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Yasuhiko. Yasuhiko, we have about 10 minutes. You said that you had some points that you were not able to get to. Go ahead.
Well, yes, this is actually a huge subject, and we can spend whole presentation. But, you know, last time and the one before, I introduced Boscovich's, you know, monistic Pan-Dynamism, Nietzsche, and then Walter Russell, and many others. And it gave a impression that, you know, it is like the base level of universe, which is true in one sense. But what is the connection between this and our spiritual evolution and the evolution of consciousness? So when we talk about this, we speak kind of a sequence, but it is actually not sequence. Everything is happening at the same time. Now, so this force field, there's an interaction amongst forces, and it has a it creates gradually more and more complex interactions. Subatomic particles, atoms, molecules, complex molecules, organisms go all the way. And forces are there at every dimension of vibrational frequencies and the complexities. So then there is a higher frequency and lower frequency. There's also a connection. So there's the semi-level interaction and vertical, so to speak, interaction. And like a flower, the first layer opens. Then involution happens. And second layer evolves. Third layer. So in that sense, when we see the evolution of a particular organism, we will see a sequential evolution. But involutionary dimension is already there. That's number one. So Pan-Dynamism is also pan-spiritualism, because the higher frequency force field, people call it spirit. So it is a same continuum. It's just a gradation of the different dimensions. And that exists now, right there. But when you and I are born, we already come with pretty much of a, and then we begin to develop ourselves to become more and more tuned into the higher vibrations. Now, so what I said initially, in order for a evolution of consciousness to take place, there need to be a evolution of our neurological configuration and functions, which include also the chakric configurations. So, say what many people call divine dimensions, which nobody has reached yet. Not the level that we have reached yet. There's a higher dimensions. In order for us to get there, reconfiguration of our neurological brain, everything has to take place. And there's a limitation as to how we can go with what we got. So we can go as far as we can go with this body and all the equipment. And cosmically, collectively, we are leading edge of this. Some of us, we are discussing. There's so much more we can go as human race. But as human being, there's some limitations. And our job is our cosmic responsibility. Our task as a human being living on this planet is to use our lives as an experiment in the adventure of evolution in consciousness. And that is actually the function of human being in the universe. Talking about the function and form. What is the function of you humans in the whole scheme of universe? Gurujev asked this question. I asked this question. The function is to make the number of the function exists in every level of our being. Highest function is the way of universe knowing itself. So universe is evolving to know itself more and more, and our function is a contribution to that in the higher level. And lower level, we have different way of contributing. So this monistic pan-dynamism can be used as a cosmological framework to discuss new spirituality and evolution of consciousness. That's I wanted to say today, actually.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Yasuhiko. It's just incredible presentation, as always. And we will see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.